Welcome to the Executive Coaching Podcast, where Executive Coach Alicia Cowan will discuss leadership topics and coaching solutions to tackle the most difficult problems that keep you from leading your team to success.
Hey there, leaders. It's Alicia Cowan. Welcome to episode number 48 of the Executive Coaching Podcast. I want to fill you in on what's been going on here around the Cowan house in the past couple of weeks. It has been busy. It is mid-September as we're recording this. So hope that if you're listening to this in fall, that fall is treating you well, or whatever season I suppose that you're in as you're listening. But it has been busy. And I will say it's been a lot of fun the past couple of weeks. So to fill you in, let's see, I've had a birthday that was celebrated in the past couple of weeks. My husband celebrated his birthday on 9/11. He is a 9/11 baby. And we had friends over yesterday, and we're having a family dinner tonight to celebrate him. So that's been fun. And it is early on a Sunday morning as I'm recording this. So I am about to head out to a swim meet after this. So once this is recorded and done, I'll be rushing out the door to go to watch my son swim and compete. And we also have been busy with coaching. Since the last podcast, I was able to get to a client's on-site meeting and do a keynote session in Miami within the past 2 weeks, and it was amazing. So a shout out to all the participants there. It was super engaging, and they were really a great group to work with and just a lot of fun. So it's been nothing short of nonstop as of late. So what I want to talk to you about today is, as I've been talking to clients and colleagues over the past couple of weeks, I want to talk about this concept of delivering feedback when you're afraid of the reaction. And so what this came up like for me, as I was working through this with a couple of people that I know, was the concept of like when you're going to deliver feedback, and specifically you're going to deliver feedback that makes you nervous or scared of the actions that the other person is going to take as a result. And to be super specific, that they will potentially quit as a result of this feedback. So I was coaching somebody recently, and they were working with an employee that was a direct report, and the employee, they thought they were amazing. So if you're thinking on a scale of 1 to 5, they're like, I am a 5 at all things all the time. So they rated themselves highest on their self-reviews and self-assessments. They also felt that they were promotion ready. They felt like they had proved their worth at this level and were ready for the next level. And they also felt like they deserved more money and that they were just irreplaceable to the company. Now, the supervisor that I was talking to disagreed with this. And they thought that this employee was a good employee and they were doing a good job, but they were not a promotion-ready associate, and they felt like they had some significant skill gaps, especially with interpersonal skills with their colleagues, and that was holding them back from being ready to take on that next level. And so, if we're thinking of that 1 to 5 scale again, this supervisor was like, "You're probably a solid 3." So, I was talking to this supervisor, and I was talking through why, and trying to understand the reasoning between delivering the feedback and holding back on the feedback. And what the fear that came up was that this person really knew certain processes really well, and no one else did. No one else was aware of how to do these certain processes. And this person basically was the single point of failure, right? So if this person was not in the business, then this could cause major disruption within operations. And so this person felt beholden to this associate. Since they were only the one who knew how to do some of these certain tasks, she was terrified. Like if she was honest and gave the direct feedback that, she had in her head and what she was thinking, she was really nervous this person would leave and that she'd be really stuck with a massive issue on her hands. So today, what I want us to consider um, is to think about the thought process of thinking that our words can control another person's actions. What I'd like you to see is, again, this thought error that she's thinking, but to understand that in thinking that if she withholds information, she can control this person. And if she thinks that she shares the information, that it would ultimately cause them to take action. And I want you to see and understand this is a form of trying to control another person. It's a false belief, and it's what we could dub like a thought error. It's kind of like the wiring is going through this incorrect process of thinking, and it's leading us to an error, right? It's kind of like your computer, right? Whatever's happening with it, it's the wrong information, the wrong inputs, and providing the wrong outputs, right? And I want us to really examine and really to think about it. Is it possible that somebody's words could control another person's actions entirely? No. If we were able to do this as leaders, we would just say simply what we wanted with our words, and then other people would just do exactly what we said. And that would be amazing. That would be lovely. I can think of so many ways that that would come in handy for me, both personally and professionally, and with my kids, with my colleagues, right? That would be amazing. But that's just simply not how it works. And we would never need any sort of leadership coaching or management training. We would just it would be so easy, right? It's just not how it works. And so I really would like to examine the fact that we think in a lot of ways, I think by this thinking that if we withhold this information, or, the false sense of if we deliver this information, that we believe we're more powerful than we actually are. When we have this thought error, the truth is that the other person truly gets to choose how they're going to think, how they're going to feel, how they're going to react when we deliver the feedback. Now, that is not to say that we can't influence people with our words. So don't mistake me there. And there is a difference between influencing and controlling, right? So it doesn't mean that we want to show up and we want to disregard what we say and how we say it. That's where our leadership style comes in. That's where it's really helpful to define how we want to show up as a leader and how we want to communicate. And so we may still want to show up as being considerate and being kind and being in line with our values and our integrity. That still can very much ring true. It does not mean we can just show up however we want and say, well, that's on you. My words don't control you and I don't influence you. Because that's a little bit far of the other side of the pendulum here. We may want to come from a place of care for this associate. So we still can think about how we're going to show up. But ultimately, how we show up is really for us to be in line with our own integrity about how we're going to carry ourselves, and for us to be in line with who we want to be, not for the other person to absolutely agree with us and to capitulate to whatever we say and whatever we ask of them. So that's the difference, right? So showing up in a way that you can be proud of is ultimately for you to be in line with your leadership. Here's the kicker. The other person may not agree with that. And that's okay, because in the workplace, we work with adults, and adults get to decide how to behave, how to react, and they get to decide what to do. It does not mean we don't hold people accountable for their actions. There still may be accountability if you choose to act however you decide you want to act, but it's not for us to control. It's just not possible. It's just setting you up for failure if you think you control people with your words. Okay, so that's the difference. So I wanted to talk about that and to think about that and really give you some food for thought to consider. If you are feeling like I want to deliver feedback to somebody and you're nervous about how they're going to react, just remind yourself you cannot control that. And again, you get to show up in a way that feels good to you, but ultimately the other person gets to decide how they're going to react. But now I get it. And in this situation that I had laid out before, if you're afraid of somebody that may quit because of the feedback, I want to talk through it. So I want to talk about two sections for this podcast that will be a little more practical. But one, I want to talk about some of the ways that we can tort ourselves when we're delivering feedback. And then once we go through those, if you identify with any of them, I want to then give you a couple of practical tips of what we can do to address it. So let's go through those. So first off, one way that we can tort ourselves to try to control others is that we don't deliver feedback at all. So I believe by doing this, we show up in a way that is dishonest. And while this is a great short-term solution, it only works in the short run. So the person goes on thinking that they're performing great. They don't get the information from you or anybody else. And we may appease them even. I've seen this happen in businesses where we may give them additional money or a promotion, but I've seen this over long term. Eventually, this will backfire. So how it can backfire is potentially as a supervisor, you can get frustrated. As an associate, they can get frustrated. And then there's an even bigger gap in the relationship due to withholding all this information. So you grow further apart in this professional relationship rather than closer together in the truth. And then it balloons. Again, over time, I've seen this happen where it balloons into this bigger problem by just ignoring this elephant in the room. And it will end up in either you having this massive issue because you've let this associate stay in position without addressing any of the performance issues. So they stay in role and continue performing in a subpar way, or they eventually get frustrated and will eventually leave anyway. Okay, so that's one way. Again, right, withholding, it may put a little Band-Aid on it, but long term, I've not seen it work out for either party in the long run. Second way I think that we show up is that we show up in a way where we just softly deliver it. So this is a little bit further of a step than withholding. We like deliver it, but we tell the associate some really general, vague, very soft feedback, but we don't really address the real issue at hand, like head on, and be really clear on it. And we only stay on the surface. So we really like tiptoe around it and softly suggest some opportunities for development. And we don't really dive deep into the skill gaps that are needed for the development. So, in this situation that I was explaining, we may be like, oh, well, I think you're a 3 and here's why, and here's what you're doing well, and et cetera, et cetera. Here's maybe some things that might work to work on, rather than saying, hey, I see that you're a 5 and you've rated yourself as 5 in terms of your self-review. I believe you're probably more at a 3, and here's why. Let's talk about it. We don't go there and really address it head on. We just stay surface and don't dive into those deeper topics, and we just skim the surface. And again, the same way that I mentioned in the beginning, this can help in the short run, but it really does not help in the long run. And it actually leaves the associate feeling more confused than clear. And I think it makes us feel short-term, makes us feel a little bit better. We think oh, well, I gave him the feedback, but it wasn't really the feedback. It wasn't really addressing the issue head on. And I think that the difference when you do this. Okay. And then 2 more. Number 3, we give a feedback sandwich. And I think we all know probably the real term that we like to give the feedback sandwich, but the feedback sandwich is when you give praise before and after some really vague criticism to soften the blow. So something like, here's some vague positive commentary. I'm going to softly tell you some things that you need to do better. And then I'm going to give you another piece of vague positive feedback. And again, I think people see through this fairly easily, both, early in their tenure or more seasoned associates. I think people can pick this apart and understand what's happening here. So the formula, it starts with this insincere, non-specific praise, goes into vague criticism, and follows up with this insincere, non-specific praise. And why this was started was because it was a process to really help either nervous managers deliver this or more sensitive employees when delivering and receiving feedback. And really, as of late, it started to fall flat within the workplace because I will say that this really, like the meat, like the center of this, really gets lost amongst the bread. So why is because one, it muddies the message and causes confusion for the associate. Two, it feels super insincere and the praise is not meaningful at all. And it avoids the necessary discomfort. It creates like this full sense of harmony and does not allow you to like really truly process the information that's being given because you're jumping around so much from this like positive to opportunity to positive. Like it doesn't really get to like settle with the associate and really like to like process what's being told to them. And therefore, nothing gets acted upon because of this as a result. All right. So the last one that I want to talk about and to dive into this is that, again, we may hold back of delivering this feedback because we're worried about these single points of failures within our business. So as I mentioned in the example, you may have somebody within the business that is the subject matter expert in this one area and no one else knows how to do this. And so I will say this, by avoiding the feedback and allowing this like single point of failure to continue, it's almost like you're being held hostage to this person. And we do not take ownership of our business and our results. So my advice, here's what I would say is if you have the single point of failure and the person is the only one doing the certain process, it's up to you to look at this and almost look at this as a to-do list for yourself. It's up to you to look at that issue and address it with a potential solution, whether it's cross-training someone within the organization, hiring somebody additional to learn the process if this is possible, or even looking at a backup plan for somebody outside the organization that could fill the void as a contractor temporarily as you figure out a long-term solution. So there's so many different options that you may have here, and it's up to you to work that out and settle that. Again, this may take some time, but do not get stuck in a position where you're beholden to one person only. Okay, so let's go through, Lord, what do we do about this? Now that we know these like 4 potential things and pitfalls that we may have, what do we do? Well, I'll tell you, I've recorded a couple of episodes that address in depth, like how to deliver feedback a little bit more in depth. So definitely those are great to refer back to. You can just type in delivering feedback and search it. I think it might be episode 32 is one, and I might have a couple others. But in a nutshell, there's 4 key steps to feedback. So number one, you just start with the context and give them what you've seen and observed using like an I statement. So meaning something like, okay, here's what I've noticed, here's what I've observed, and here's what I've seen. Again, I dive more into this, but using the I statement really puts it on you with the ownership rather than using a you statement and putting the person on the defense. The second thing is you want to let them know the impact of what that feedback is, right? So if here's what I've seen, talk about the results and what the most meaningful consequence is to you and or to them. So it could sound like, here's what I've noticed and here's what I've observed, and then here's the impact on that to either your results, to the projects, to the company, et cetera, et cetera. So like what impact is it having on results? And then the last piece here, really simply, you want to get their perspective and then close out and talk about expected next steps. So what do you think? And what do you think we can agree to do next? Again, I'm keeping this like super high level and super brief because I think, you can think through this and there's tons of research and books on all of this. I love Radical Candor is super helpful as a book. And Crucial Conversations is another great book that helps kind of break this formula down even more in depth. So to think through this, I think being kind and caring and knowing what is best for the person long-term, it's not just what feels easiest right now. So when you're thinking about overall like delivering feedback, like really caring about them is not sometimes comfortable right now for you. And so being really clear with this, it means no room for interpretation on their end about what you really think. And while also there's some room to being open to the possibility that your opinion could be wrong. Okay. So let me give you a couple of pro tips about this to close out. So number one, be humble when you're walking into this conversation. If you walk into the conversation with like this strong sense of humility, knowing that your one point of view of feedback is still a really important piece of, but of a larger big puzzle. So you can speak from your point of view, but you can also leave space for them as well, because you don't know everything and all about everything that they do within their work product. So you want to leave space for them to give their vantage point as well. Also, too, you want to like go into it the mindset of, again, how do I want to show up? And consider the goal of the conversation to be helpful. Are you going into this conversation of feedback, like going into to win it and to make sure that you're right and then you have control? Or are you going in with the mentality of you want to help? And if your goal is to make sure the other person can succeed, great. Otherwise, it may not be helpful. Okay. Next, you want to be immediate or as close to immediate as possible. So if you wait too long to give feedback, sometimes it lets these issues fester and turns into something that is way bigger a deal than it should be. Now, I'm a big fan. You give praise in public and you give developmental feedback in private. So when I say immediate, not immediate. You want to make sure that you're in a space where the person can receive it in a safe place. And next, I get this one a lot. Some people give feedback over text or email or whatever messaging rather than doing it face-to-face or even face-to-face virtually over Zoom or Teams or whatever. And I will say this, I would advise doing it face-to-face as much as possible, because if not, you can really lose a sense of how your words are landing, as well as hear the back and forth to have and understand the full context of the other person's perspective and experience. Okay. And lastly, I think the big one is make it not about personality. Really focus on the behaviors and not the person and their personality. So an example could be, I've noticed you're not showing up to work on time versus you seem to be lazy, right? Totally a different conversation. So make sure you're really cleaning it up and focusing on what is occurring, not personality traits. Okay. All right. So that's what I have for you. And again, I think we talked a little bit about the difficult conversations that and what their potential results could be. And I think that it's okay to approach this with a sense of curiosity yourself and openness, and to say a little bit of messiness in these conversations can be normal and almost beneficial in a way. They're not expected to go perfectly all the time. And so I think because if we can drop that, I think because a lot of people think that they should go perfectly, they also avoid them altogether. So really embracing some of that discomfort, as I've talked about in many podcasts about being a leader as well, it really just allows for more authenticity and more impactful communication and relationships to be built on that. So if you move away from this vague feedback and towards more like genuine, timely, really specific feedback, you can start to just build upon that improvement and that culture of really strong relationships with you and your team. And again, put into place these things that you may be fearful of, really look at them and understand why you may be fearful of them. And that might create some work for you. As I mentioned, like there may be some stopgaps in your business where you need to shore up and you need to take responsibility over making sure that you have contingency plans in place. So that way you are not beholden to just one associate. All right, so don't be afraid. Have some crucial conversations. Make sure you're delivering feedback and coaching the person that is on the receiving end of that feedback. As always, again, I mentioned I've been talking through this with clients. If you need help with any arena of this, please don't hesitate to reach out and I'd be glad to help you. If you want to reach out to me, my website is aliciacowen.com, ELISIAKEOWN, coaching.com. And as always, thank you for listening. Talk to you next time. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Executive Coaching Podcast with Alicia Cowan. If you're ready to have an executive coach who's ready to help you lead your team to success, then book an introductory call at aliciacowancoaching.com/call.